Early morning, Antietam. I'm standing at the base of the New York Monument right now, near the Visitor Center in Antietam. And just to the rear there, you can see a cannon that's set up for demonstration for later on. And here pretty soon, we'll have the sun rising over Antietam. No doubt, during the early morning hours of the 17th of September, 1862, a lot of men took these fields out here, not knowing whether or not it was going to be the last morning that they'd be alive. This is a pretty amazing place to be. Good morning from Antietam. Today it's September 16th, 2023. And back on September 16th of 1862, Robert E. Lee has brought a portion of his army here to Antietam. And he's ordered his army to come here and converge at the same place, virtually at the same time, so that he can concentrate his forces here in Antietam and continue the fight. Unfortunately for him, McClellan had a set of orders in his hands that were found not too long before that a courier had lost along the way, that was rolled up with a couple of cigars on the inside. It was almost as if the courier gave a gift to the Union Army. So here they are at Antietam, gathering together. And McClellan has brought his forces out here too. And on the 16th, McClellan has actually ordered a portion of his army to try to find the left flank of General Lee's army. And they find General Hood. So they come across and they start skirmishing and attacking in the evening hours with General Hood here at Antietam on the 16th. But it's not until the 17th that the major death and destruction happens here on this field. And where I'm standing right now is on the New York Monument in front of the Dunker Church, which you can see directly behind me here in the background. And that's where one of the most famous photographs was taken during the Antietam series about the dead at Antietam. I'm not exactly sure what the weather was like during those days in 1862, but I know today it's really foggy out here. The fog is in the low-lying areas in the valley. You can see in the background here some of the fog, and you can see the cornfields which they've planted here and they've allowed to grow, and the rolling hills you can't necessarily see. Over here behind me, you can see this range that's barely sticking up above the fog. And the fog has kind of settled down nice and low. And the sunrise is coming up right over here behind me. Top of the morning, friends. Here we are in Antietam. We're at the sunrise here at the Visitor Center, checking it out and looking over the fields today in this peaceful, beautiful valley down below. Directly off in this direction here, this was not a peaceful place. The center of the line is going to be roughly out there somewhere. There's going to be a sunken road. It's going to be forever known as Bloody Lane. And we'll go over there today and we'll talk about it. We'll also hit some of the other points of this battlefield and try to grasp the understanding of why it is that this place became known as the single bloodiest day in American history when it comes to combat and death. There were a lot of men left on this field, wounded and dying, when the 17th ended. And on into the 18th, still skirmishing continued to happen, and they were still dying afterwards. So we'll hit some of those points and we'll talk about it today, and hopefully, like I said, we can get a better understanding of it. Thanks for joining me out here at the field today for the sunrise at Antietam, and hope you stay tuned. History with Waffles. Welcome to Antietam, Maryland, the Antietam National Battlefield. I'm here in Sharpsburg, Maryland, at the Antietam Battlefield, and my current location is out in a place called Miller's Cornfield. And this is where the majority of the terrible fighting happened here near the West Woods and the cornfield itself. To set this whole thing up, we'll talk a little bit about what happened prior to this battle. So, General Lee has started the conquest to go north. And his reason behind that is he wants to get the army out of the South. He wants to give Virginia a break. Virginia has been the majority of the battlefields at that time, and the land is desolated. The fighting has ruined farm fields, and the armies have pretty much taken just about everything that they can take from the people. So if he can get the fight out of the South, then he can give those farms time to get prepared for crops and to replenish themselves. But his main agenda is to move the fight north to possibly capture DC if he can. If they can do that, then they stand a chance to have foreign entities coming on their side, as in Great Britain, possibly France, and then maybe persuade Europe to side with the Southern forces. Now at the time, it was a very big possibility that could happen, because it was even said in some of the papers over in Europe and in Britain that the North couldn't vanquish the South, that they saw the Army and the Navy being built, and that there was now a country being built. The main difference between the fight that happened here, though, the reason why this turned out to be somewhat of a catastrophe for McClellan, was the fact that Robert E. Lee put his entire force in. He fought like he had no reservation and like he had to go all the way in. McClellan, on the other hand, put less than 3/4 of his own army into the fight. And so what you have is that back and forth tug of war, and Robert E. Lee himself on horseback going up and down the line, checking his men, making sure that the holes are filled, and making sure that the army is properly being used. That was the difference in the commanders. One was extremely reserved, knew how to do his job, and he was willing to take a chance and risk his army. The other, on the other hand, was very cautious. He wasn't willing to risk that entire army. And even though he was a really good commander and he was a good officer, he wasn't that good at his job in the field. So as we walk these fields and you go across them, you can actually get a feel for the terrain itself. And if you ask yourself, well, why would Lee want to converge here? Why would he want to fight here? Well, the main reason is because there's hilly open grounds. You can put long-range artillery out here and fight at a distance if you have to with the artillery. You can place large bodies of men shoulder to shoulder and march them across the field and know what you're doing. So for a commander, in order to put his army together, he has to know that he has the support. So he's going to place his army in the town. He's going to have the support of knowing that the waterway out here, Antietam Creek, is too deep to cross by foot. There are 3 bridges, 3 narrow bridges, and that's the only way to get across. And he knows that he's pretty much put the Union Army at a disadvantage immediately when they get on the field. And so what that does is it squares up the numbers. If you have an army that is disadvantaged in numbers, you have to be advantaged in the position that you take. And that's exactly what Lee did here at Antietam. So now on September 15th, Robert E. Lee comes to this town and he places his forces here. And the entirety of the force is not here yet, but the majority is. So he places his forces out here at this town and he sets them up. And he waits for McClellan at that time. But by September 16th, McClellan sends Joseph Hooker's 1st Corps in motion to find Lee's left flank. And he ends up finding John Bell Hood. So they skirmish on the 16th until dusk, and that sets up the Battle of Antietam. And that's where we are today. Now I'll post the picture here off to the right-hand side of my pan so that you can see what I'm talking about. But if you compare the outline of the rocks there directly in front where the trees are, and then look at this photograph here on the right-hand side, you can actually stand in the place where one of these photographs was taken, and it had been identified as this location. So we could sit out here all day and talk about the different forces that are fighting here at the field. But what we really need to do is go over the big picture. The big picture is there's 132,000 soldiers here at any given time that are fighting each other. 87,000 Union soldiers, 45,000 Confederate soldiers. The biggest flaw in McClellan's plan is the fact that he's not willing to sacrifice any more than just a little less than 3/4 of his force. And so we find ourselves in kind of a gridlock on September 18th. When the 17th ends and the 18th comes around, there's skirmishing, but nothing much more than that. And then Lee waits for a big attack, realizes it's not coming, takes the initiative, and pulls his army out of Antietam and moves back across the river. So the marker directly behind me here, if you can see it, this is Maryland. Oh great, another northern marker. Not exactly. This was a unit that was with the Confederate States. Their artillery unit was placed out here, and they were partially to blame for Sedgwick's destruction here in the West Woods. That morning, early in the morning of September 17th, 1862, General McClellan orders Hooker to come across to these positions at the Cornfield and the West Woods in order to attack the enemy where they are and find the left flank. General Hooker, old Fighting Joe, gets his army up and ready and starts the press. And he finds that left flank all right. Sedgwick kind of gets detached a little bit, and two of his corps, or two of his units, end up in the Sunken Road for some reason. His main body comes across here to the West Woods, thinking that they're going to go into the West Woods, swing around to the south side, and attack the forces over near the Dunker Church. But what happens in this position is he gets into the West Woods and he finds artillery, he finds Jackson, and he finds converging fire on three sides. And within 20 minutes, that converging fire rips apart his main body. Something like 2,200 men fall within that time frame as casualties of this battle. Massachusetts ends up being one of the units out here that has the greatest number of casualties throughout the entire battle, with a little over 300 men in their unit falling dead or wounded here in this position. So the West Woods was a pretty serious place to fight. It was no joke. And really, the reason why it turned out to be so bad was because, in my opinion, a little bit of bungling on the leadership. You think the woods are clear and you're going to swing to the south and you're not going to probe the position and figure it out. And then you get over here and you find out that you've got artillery and converging fire on three sides. That's not a winnable plan. So I'm out here at Miller's Cornfield, near the West Woods, to kind of give you an idea of what it would have been like marching through these cornfields. At the time, the average soldier was between 5'7" and 5'9". So it's not a very tall person. And this corn, it goes well above my head, and I'm almost 6 feet tall. So if you can imagine yourself a soldier, you're weighted down with a 15-pound musket in your hand, you're wearing all wool, it's getting warm, you're marching shoulder to shoulder with your fellow soldiers here at the field, and then you can hear the rattle of the muskets on the other side, you can hear the cannons going off, you can smell the black powder in the air. You know the fight's about to come to you, right to your face. Then you step out into a small clearing, not very large, and the Confederates are there waiting on you. They open fire, and all around you, men drop to the field as casualties start to pile up. Then you turn and run. You have your fellow soldiers behind you that are getting ready to go into the fight. They go in and they run. And back and forth. It happens like that all day. The Confederates are pushing them out. The Union is pushing the Confederates back to their positions. Men start to pile up all over the place. And the casualty count gets pretty high here at the cornfield. It's a very deadly place. Today it's very peaceful. You can see the corn for yourself out here and walk around here at Antietam at Miller's Cornfield and check it out. So I'm out here at the Joseph Poffenberger farm right now, walking around. And the reason why I'm here is because of Claire Barton. Claire Barton, at the time of this battle, was a 40-year-old school teacher. And she kept hearing reports about battles, soldiers not having adequate supplies, doctors not being able to take care of their soldiers. She got frustrated. She was a pretty successful woman up to that point, being a teacher, a patent clerk, and she had a very large house in Maryland. So she gathered up supplies, she got a team together, and she pulled them out here to this field at this battle. And it was needed. The soldiers would call her the Angel of Antietam Battlefield. She would go on to be part of the American Red Cross, one of the people that would help found that, and the headquarters would actually be out of her home in Maryland. So out here at Antietam at the Bloody Lane, the general overview of what happened here. Essentially, 2,200 Confederate soldiers were holding this line here at the Sunken Road against overwhelming odds. There was something around 10,000 plus soldiers attacking this position from the Union Army, all coming from Sumner's Corps and French's division. And we also looking at various different units that are pouring into this field as well. Where I'm at right now is where the North Carolinians would have been. And directly behind me there, if you look and see that tower, South Carolina and Georgia would have also come in on that direction. And South Carolina is also up ahead in front of me. Walking forward here, when you get to the Roulette Farm location where the lane is, it goes out to the farm, Alabama would have been there. And when we get to that point, this is where the 6th Alabama is. The 6th Alabama was commanded by John B. Gordon. And in this position, if you've ever read up on it, it tells about how John B. Gordon was wounded out here at this Sunken Road. I believe it was 6 times he took a wound out here. And one time, he actually took the wound to the face. And if you ever look at some of his late war pictures, you can see the sunken depression in his face from where the bullet went through. The thing that he said saved him was a Yankee bullet pierced his hat, leaving a hole in the bottom of his hat so that the blood could pour out, so that he wouldn't drown in his own blood when he fell forward. There's some crazy fighting out here. Directly behind me here at Bloody Lane is the marker for G.B. Anderson's mortal wounding. The story's a little bit more complicated than just being shot and being injured on a field and then dying. G.B. Anderson was wounded in the foot. It doesn't typically sound like something that you would die from, but the shrapnel was left in the foot and the surgeon had no idea it was there to begin with. Then later on his foot started hurting even worse. He went back to Raleigh to recuperate because they actually had to amputate that foot. And that was a cannon. Anyways, so he goes back to Raleigh to recuperate, and while he was there, unfortunately, he ends up dying and succumbing to his wound. I believe it was October 16th. Of 1862 when he finally passed away. If you're in the Irish Brigade and it's September 17th and you're getting ready to attack the Sunken Road, this is what it looks like. Directly behind me. That position just up over that hill as a reference point, that hilltop. You have to go to the top and then come back down towards the Sunken Road. There is no way of seeing what's on the other side of that until you get over this hill. And if you look all around this position, it's like that everywhere. Now the position that we're at right now is adjacent to the Roulette Farm, which is right over there. You can see it kind of off in the distance right there. The farm road runs just below the hill, right up towards those trees there. The visitor center is right about there, and then that main monument for New York is sitting on top of the hill there. Now, from this position, you would have seen McClaw's men back in this direction. Jackson is off in those woods. Hooker is coming from over in that direction. And in this direction here is where French and his men are. And we have 3 separate setups, one after the other, that are supposed to go in waves into the battle here at the Sunken Road. And directly in front of me, as you can tell by looking at the hill, and this hill right here, it's not a very good position to be in when marching in columns and rows. When you're marching towards that hill, you can't really see the target up there above you. So the Sunken Road itself separated two farms. In the main position over there, we have Alabama off to the right-hand side where you're looking, and you have North Carolina off to the left-hand side. Colquitt, McRae, and Cobb would have been over there on that right-hand side with Alabama. And to that left-hand side, you would have seen North Carolina with G.B. Anderson. And then behind that was the Cornfield for Piper's Farm. Right out in front, the 1st Delaware, 5th Maryland, 4th New York from Weber is the first wave. And then at the farm, right about where we're at, we have the 14th Connecticut, 130th Pennsylvania, 108th New York of Morris, right in through these fields here. And behind Roulette Farm, stretching in the field behind me here, is the 14th Indiana, the 8th Ohio, the 132nd Pennsylvania, and the 7th Wisconsin of Kimball. And this is all under Sumner's 2nd Corps. So we're going to go walk up this field here and kind of show you where that second line would have been walking into the fire after the first line gets rejected and thrown back into their face. So here we are at the overlook of the Burnside Bridge here in Antietam. To go over a little bit of the action that happened here, off in the left direction here, Connecticut comes out of the woods and onto the open field and makes an attempt on the bridge. Then Ohio comes up and tries to make an attempt. One of their commanders is actually shot and is floating in the water drifting down the river. Shortly thereafter, after the fight has commenced and has been going on for a long time, New York and Pennsylvania come up, and they had just recently had their whiskey rations taken from them. Well, at this time, the Confederate soldiers had been thinned out by Robert E. Lee pulling soldiers from this location. So there were a lot less up here on this bluff. And when those New Yorkers and those Pennsylvanians come up to their commander and ask him, hey, if we take that bridge, can we have our whiskey ration back? Then the commander said resoundingly, by God, yes, you can. And so as it goes, those two units, I believe they were the 51st, charged across that bridge and took that bridge. But then they were confronted with the high bluff that I'm standing on now. It took Burnside roughly 2 hours to get his men up this bluff and into position to fight here at this location that we now call the Burnside Bridge. Directly behind me here is the infamous Burnside Bridge. It's one of the 3 bridges that was here at the time in Sharpsburg, Maryland. It goes across the Antietam Creek. The fence behind me here, a very famous photograph was made of a soldier standing alongside this fence and other soldiers buried at the base of the fence. Their headstones would be wood planks pulled from that actual bridge right there. A story that was told on the signage out here about 2 men that fought here. Eva and Rebecca Taylor were sisters. They would go on to marry 2 men. One fought in the north and one fought for the south. Fate would have the both of them fighting here against each other. One of the husbands was wounded, and he would survive only 24 hours, but die later on. The other husband would continue to fight, but then tragically, that man would die at the age of 36 of a heart attack. both of those women lost their husbands during the time of war. Just another story of brother versus brother, family member versus family member in this American Civil War. Perhaps it's irony, maybe even tragedy, that Burnside was sent to attack the right flank, and it turns out the position that he would go to would end up being a bridge. Later on that year, he would take over the Army of the Potomac, and another pain in his side would be Fredericksburg and bridges, not having access to bridges and having to build pontoon bridges. I think it's pretty ironic. Here at this location, Burnside was supposed to attack the right flank. He ends up sending 3 separate attacks across this bridge, smaller attacks as they were, because he didn't think that this position was a great position to attack. He sends 3,000 of his soldiers around the other side to create a massive attack against the flank itself. But the attack here at the bridge was brutal. One of the soldiers said that they sent showers of lead across that bridge to the other side. Here we are at the Burnside Bridge at Antietam. Now, I'm standing in the position right now where Colonel Lee would have had his 19 guns placed. Right here on this hill, in front of what is called the Dunker Church. There was a photograph taken here next to caissons. There was Confederate soldiers that were laid out on the ground. And no doubt many of them were from that battery of cannons that were placed here during the Battle of Antietam. After the Battle of Antietam, Alexander Gardner brought his cameras out here with his crew, and he took pictures of a lot of Confederate dead on the ground and the destruction that the battle caused. But sometimes he also took pictures of soldiers in position. And here in this very spot, Colonel Lee would have his 19 cannons in place. Eventually they were driven from this location, and another unit placed their cannons here from the Union Army. Gardner would have them pose roughly in this position here. And in that photo, there would be a dead horse in front of the artillerymen who were placed in position. And we'll post a picture of that up here with this video so that you can see kind of comparison as to what it would look like. One of the more famous photographs that was taken during Alexander Gardner's session out here at Antietam happened right up on that hill where those artillery pieces are. And it was facing in this direction. And directly behind me is the subject of that photo that was in the distance. It was the Dunker Church. And you can see it in that picture. Now, the Dunker Church was a church built by the German Brethren, or the German Baptist. It was built here in 1852. It did fall in disrepair after the battle. It really wasn't looking like it is today. But thanks to preservationists and a national park, we are able to go inside and see what this place would have looked like during the Battle of Antietam. The piles of dead on the Sharpsburg and Hagerstown Turnpike surpassed anything on any other battlefield of my observation. My feeling was that the Antietam Turnpike surpassed all in manifest evidence of slaughter. Major Rufus Dawes. The sign directly behind me here depicts a quote from Major Rufus Dawes that talks about the death here at the Turnpike. This location is supposed to be roughly where a photograph was taken shortly after the battle of the Confederate dead here at the fence at the Turnpike. The photo itself shows men laid in piles, all kinds of jagged positions, and bloated from death, essentially. And it was the first time that those types of photographs were taken and displayed for the public to see. And just as we said before, the reason why Confederates were in those pictures and not Union soldiers was because the Union soldiers were already buried and in the ground for the most part, and they had to take a picture of what they saw in the field. And at that time, what they saw was bodies from the Confederate soldiers laid everywhere. And they saw accoutrements of all sorts, horses that were dead on the field, wagons, caissons, all kinds of things that were just blown to bits. They saw the true destruction of war right here at Antietam, and they captured it with their camera. I'm walking out near the Joseph Poffenberger farm now, here on the 17th, the anniversary of Antietam. And out in this location here would have been the first corps of General Joseph Hooker. Also adjacent to him would have been the 12th Corps. There was a total of about 15,000 men that were out here camped in and around these fields before the fighting on the 17th. And General Joseph Hooker actually spent the night in the barns over here before his fight, and his staff was over there as well. And he told them the next morning at about 2 a.m. that they would fight the fight that would decide the fate of the Republic. And one soldier remarked that that morning when they started to be engaged in the fight, that the stars were still brightly shining in the sky as they stepped off to get into the West Woods. General Joseph Hooker had one heck of a time fighting from this direction and going towards the North Woods. And that day would be a very long day for his corps and for his men, and very bloody as well. The position here where I'm taking cover under these trees to get out of the rain was dubbed the East Woods. Now this position here is where the actual initial skirmish started to happen on September 16th of 1862, when Hooker probed for the left flank and found Hood's men here in these woods. There was a story that was told by another soldier shortly after the fighting ceased over here, where he talked about the Confederate dead that lay on the ground and what he found. And he spoke of a boy that he said was no more than 16 years of age. He came across him and he had been wounded in his side. And he said he reached down and he took a look at the young man, and by the man's head was a book. And he had assumed that maybe the young man had received that book as a gift from a friend. And in his final moments, he took the book from his pocket and was reading it before he expired on the field of battle here at Antietam. Now that we're at a better vantage point looking at this position, you can see the outcropping of rocks here, and then rocks over there, and then there is a memorial that's set up in the middle. This is the position of that famous photograph that I spoke about yesterday, where the burial party was actually sitting on the rocks on this side over here. I'll put the picture in the picture so that you can actually see the picture down here, what exactly it looked like at that time. So just as Burnside gets his men up over his location at the bridge, and he gets them up onto that Confederate overlook, He gets them into position and he starts the attack. And just as it looks like the Confederates are about to be on the run, out of nowhere comes A.P. Hill. A.P. Hill's men charge into the attack, and they're coming out of Harper's Ferry. They were told to come up as soon as they possibly could, and they made a forced march to get into this position. And it quite frankly saved the Confederate Army at that time from complete and total destruction. If Burnside gets into the position in time, then he can fold up the army by the flank. And the outcome of this battle may have been drastically different, and that army of Northern Virginia may have not existed after this battle. It's been awesome being out here in Sharpsburg, Maryland, bringing the Battle of Antietam to you the last couple of days in both the sun and the rain. So hopefully we'll have better weather next time. We'll bring some more videos to you. I got a few more things coming, but stay tuned here on YouTube and check me out on the Twitter account as well. Until next time, this is History with Waffles.